Over the weekend, Tom, I don't know if you saw it. There was a video that went viral. I saw it on Wayne Dupree's Twitter account and ended up getting into a little bit of a discussion about it afterward. Sarah Silverman, the well-known actress, been in movies for a few decades now, who has been an out-and-out anti-Republican, anti-conservative, Trump-hating leftist for the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. Was she a prominent leftist before Trump?
Yeah.
Or was that a function of Trump?
She was a prominent Obama supporter.
Okay. All right.
She was a prominent Obama supporter. I don't know that anybody on the left really had this such miserable hatred. They did not like Republicans. They spoke ill of Republicans. But this murderous rage that so many of them had that makes Kathy Griffin hold a fake head of the president dripping in blood.
Yeah.
I don't know that anybody had that. I don't know that we would have seen Madonna standing on a stage saying, "I want to blow up the White House."
Yeah.
That all kind of came out during Trump.
Yeah.
Maybe just exposed some inner demons that they didn't want to talk about before.
Right.
But Sarah Silverman came out with a really interesting comment. And she said, "I'm leaving the Democratic Party. That doesn't mean that I'm actually going to become a Republican.
Right.
It doesn't mean that I believe in conservative ideas. In fact," she said, "I still, my initial reaction, her initial reaction, is that anything that comes from a Republican is wrong and bad and has negative intentions."
Right.
But she comes out and she said, "I'm not going to be a Democrat anymore. In fact, I'm not going to join any party." And she said one thing that a lot of people held on to, the "I'm not going to be a Democrat anymore," and they got really excited about that. Some said, "Too little, too late. You've been an obnoxious, awful human being to us for the last 5 years, and I don't want to hear it."
Right.
But others said, "It's really nice that she's finally waking up." The one thing that really stood out to me in her comment was, she said there's no more truth. She said, "We can't agree that anything is true anymore. And how can we have any conversations if we can't even agree that some basic things are true?"
Was her emphasis that truth does not exist, or was her emphasis that we can't agree on what the truth is?
No.
That it's there, the truth is there, we just ignore it?
It was the latter. It was the truth exists. There are things that are true. Now, she would say follow the science because she's still in her gut, she's still this progressive.
Right.
But she said we're supposed to be progressive. And we've gotten to this whole all or nothing and get rid of all of this or else we do nothing. And she said the Democratic Party is doing nothing productive. They're not progressing the way she would like. And she thinks the root of that is truth. And I sat and I thought for a minute.
It's a big point.
Well, it is. And it's amazing because it's something we've been talking about all along. And we'll talk more about how that applies to what we talk about in the Vino Veritas Society. But I came back to this article on the American Dissident that we talked about last month and we wanted to talk more about today.
Yep.
And I thought, what a perfect example of people moving within that circle. So I don't have page numbers on this, but I did print it out today. And within that article, 4, 5, 6 pages in.
And we've linked to it, right? We linked to it on the past podcast, and we'll have a link to it.
It will be again on this one.
Okay.
Yeah. So in there, like I said, 4 or 5, maybe 6 pages in, there's this circle that starts with government in the middle and the dissidents, the active dissidents on the outside. And as you move in and out, you go from an active dissident, opponent of oppression, to a passive opponent of oppression, to an active or to a passive supporter of oppression, to an active supporter of oppression, to the large businesses, large institutions, the bureaucracies, plus the Facebooks, Twitters, Googles,
universities,
Hollywood, right? And then you have government in the middle, right? And I'd encourage people, go pull this up real quick and look at it so you can kind of follow along. But to me, what we saw Sarah Silverman go from being an active supporter of oppression to a passive supporter of oppression. And it proves there's a lot of people out there who will tell us, and we have conversations with a lot of people, many of which say, yeah, I want to join the Vino Veritas Society. I want to be a part of this.
Yeah.
But also we get a lot of people who say, yeah, you know what? There's no more hope. We're done. The people are dug in, they're entrenched. There's no way you're going to change anybody's minds. And I look at somebody like her who came to that conclusion either on her own or with the help of somebody else in her orbit. And she moved closer to us.
Yep.
However slightly that is.
Yep.
And she opened a door. She opened a door and said, we need to come to an agreement on truth. And at one point, somebody needs to sit her down and say, you know what's true? That all men are created equal because all men have equal individual natural rights.
Right. And probably this is just a little suggestion about rhetoric. If talking to her, I would recommend saying, all human beings, so that the idea is easily absorbed without getting into that, fight about, well, did they mean males versus females?
Sure. So I think it's a nice lead into our conversation today, which I wanted to finish the conversation about being the new American dissident, as we termed it, as Hamachek referenced in his piece, and spend some more time today actually talking about what does it look like to be a dissident.
Yeah. And because, one of his big overriding themes, overarching throughout the piece, is you cannot be an effective dissident unless you know you're a dissident. You recognize what you are and the situation that you're in. And the premise of his piece, and I think you and I generally agree with this, all the major levers of power and influence, starting with government in the center, precisely because it is the monopoly on legalized force. Only government can forcefully command and make people do things they don't want to do. And then all the other, big opinion-shaping, culture-shaping, gigantic companies and platforms that even control how we communicate with each other, what we communicate to each other. The big tech companies, Hollywood, the universities, the media, big influential institutions, organizations. We're not part of that.
Right.
Those of us who care about freedom, we are outside of those circles of gigantic cultural, political, historical leverage, and we're outside criticizing it. We're saying what's going on there is wrong. But we don't have our hands on those big levers of power. We can't just do something and overnight change the opinions of millions or hundreds of millions of fellow citizens and change the course of history. And therefore, first of all, we have to understand where we are. We're a minority. Those of us who care about individual liberty, constitutionally limited government, a free society, upward economic mobility, people creating new wealth, and because they're secure in what they produce and what they earn. But basically, those basic precepts of the American founding, of the Declaration of Independence, those of us who believe in those, we're in a minority. We're outside the levers of power. We would like to become the powerful. We'd like to be able to shape culture, shape opinion, but that's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a dramatic transformation. And truthfully, it's one of the reasons, why we started the Vino Veritas Society. It's the main reason why we started the Vino Veritas Society. If the United States in particular today, and the Western world in general, was a bastion of individual liberty and property rights and the rule of law, and people were flourishing and they were healthy and happy and loving life, and every generation, it was better for the children than it was for their parents, there wouldn't be a need for the Vino Veritas Society. But that's not the path we're on. I mean, I'm thinking of the title of Hayek's old book, The Road to Serfdom. That's a more accurate label for what we're on the road to serfdom. We're on the road down to a despotic, tyrannical regime, and we're trying to remind Americans what's at stake here and everything that they're losing. And Mr. Hamachek, one of his big points in his essay is, if you begin by understanding that we are dissidents, we are a minority, we are outside the big institutions of influence and change and power, then we can better strategize what to do and how to do it, how to speak, how to interact, what kind of tactics to use and not to use. And I think that leads right into those concentric circles that you have printed out. It's interesting if you look at the very outer, the farthest away from the center of power, the farthest away from it. If you think of is Pluto still a planet, Dave?
I think they made it a planet again.
Is it a planet?
It was, and then it wasn't, and now I think it is again.
For the sake of this, let's just assume little Pluto is a planet. If you think of those concentric circles as the orbits of our solar system, we're little Pluto. We're the farthest ones out there, right? The dissidents who are active. We're unhappy about progressive central planning and tribal identity politics and the road to serfdom that we're on. And we are voicing our opposition. We're voicing our concern. And we're the farthest away. One step inside of that are dissidents. They disagree. They don't like the path we're going down, but they're passive. They're quiet. And there are many reasons for them being quiet. Maybe it's, professional, financial. They're in their job, their business is such that if they speak out too much, if they're too critical of current, the progressive regime we're in, it'll really cost them. And so they're reluctant to do that. There's a kind of fear probably feeding into that.
On that note, I mean, we have evidence of that right here in Colorado. Colorado is one of 11 states that publishes publicly every single citizen's voter record or voter registration. So you don't know who they voted for,
right? But
you can look up any citizen in the state of Colorado,
see how they registered,
and see what they're registered as. And we have record numbers of unaffiliated voter registration in Colorado compared to other states. The number of people who are registered as an independent and unaffiliated, as Colorado calls it, is significantly higher than the national average because of people who don't want to be affiliated with a party, mostly on the Republican side, mostly the opponents of that suppression or that oppression.
It's a curiosity. I'm going to ask a question here, and I'm going to acknowledge right front. I have not gone and looked at this data, so I don't know the answer. I don't know if you do or maybe one of our listeners does. I would suspect that states that have that open record for registration, I would suspect that those states have significantly higher unaffiliated voters precisely for this reason. And then states where it's closed, where it's secretive, people feel more comfortable registering with one party or another. I mean, it's sort of an interesting thing, right? In the name of transparency, we pass these laws saying let's make this open knowledge how people register. Right. And then the result is growing numbers of people register as unaffiliated, which really doesn't tell you anything.
It's a bit tangential, but pull that string further. What ended up happening was all these people started registering unaffiliated. Well, then they stopped having a say in the primary elections.
Right.
So in Colorado, I can't remember if it was 14, 16, or 18. I think it was 14. We passed a law that said unaffiliated voters can choose one of the two primary ballots, but they can participate in one of the two primaries, even though they're not affiliated with the party.
Yep.
And it was a state law when the parties have always been intended to be private organizations.
So in fact, one of our mutual friends, John Caldera, made a big public in one of those election cycles right after that. He made a big public deal about he requested the Democrat primary. Yeah. He was going to vote. He's never been right. He opposes the Democrats on almost everything.
Yep.
But he wanted to demonstrate the foolishness of that law by voting in the Democratic primary.
And it allows people to manipulate and everything else. So it's that domino effect that we always think, let's just put a Band-Aid on this. And well, this didn't work out exactly how we wanted it. FDR in 1936. Didn't work out exactly how we wanted it. Give us more power and give us more control over things, and we'll fix it.
Yeah. And so the point is there are large numbers here in Colorado and across the country, large numbers of dissidents, right? And you think of when we say dissident, think of that as a loose synonym for constitutional conservatives. If you're a constitutionalist, you care about constitutionally limited government and large realms of individual liberty and private property and free markets, you're really a dissident today. You stand opposed to the regime. And there are large numbers of passive dissidents. They're dissidents. They're not happy. They oppose what's going on, but they're quiet. They tend not to do much for many reasons.
I would almost call them potential dissidents. They're opponents of oppression, but they're not actually acting as dissidents yet.
Well,
they're potentially there.
They probably act like dissidents when they vote.
Sure.
I would suspect. But for the most part, day to day, they're quiet. They're not voicing and articulating why they're dissident or their dissent from the controlling progressive regime. And one of the points that Mr. Hamachek makes in his article, which I think is very important for those of us who are dissidents, who are constitutionalists, who love freedom, step one, don't go alienate our fellow dissidents who are passive, who are quiet. We may not understand all the reasons why they're quiet and passive. Whatever it is, they're allies of ours, and we want to strengthen them. We want to fortify them. We don't want to alienate them by calling them wimps or cowards or something like that. That does not serve our strategic purpose.
I would also remind people threatening people who are generally passive doesn't often work out well. If somebody is passive because they're fearful, threatening them to not be passive is rarely going to work. And we see that across the country, right? We see, if you don't start doing this, I'm going to treat you as one of the enemies. You are one of the bad people. Stop doing this. And I'm going to lump you in with the old Sarah Silverman.
Right.
So we have to keep in mind that I think the point we're trying to get to here is these concentric circles, people can move in and out of them continuously. And the goal is to expand that active dissident role as much as possible. We are the minority because not only are we the minority in the number of people who think that we should be free, we should live under the constitutional government the way it was described. And that's shrinking. And a lot of that's shrinking because, one, the media, two, because of where people work. And my boss is a good guy or a good woman, and he believes in this. So he or she believes in this. So let's follow that. I'm going to move more towards that. Or I just got a job at Facebook. I better fall in line because they're paying me a whole lot of money.
Yeah. In fact, as I've been looking at those concentric circles, and again, I'm going to go. I think it's easier for our listeners who maybe don't have that image in front of them. Again, think of the orbits of the solar system, right? And the sun is in the middle. Then you have all the planets going out. In the way Mr. Hamachek describes it, and I agree, the sun is the government, right? It's at the center of our progressive regime of control and central planning. And then as you go out in the layers, right, you have the next layer, or you have these big institutions that help prop up the progressive regime. Then you have the people who, as individuals, they either actively support the progressive central planning or they passively support it. And then you get to the very outer limits, and that's where you end up with you have the dissidents, and you have passive, quiet dissidents, and active, like us, very active dissidents. And as I've thought about that model, I think it's really interesting. I think there is movement in and out. Children, little tiny children. I'm talking about children who are just starting to talk.
Right.
I have 3 children myself, and I witnessed this with my own eyes, and I'm sure others out there have seen the same thing. One of the very first words, little kids, often it's mama or daddy, but one of the very first words children learn is no.
Right.
No. And it's one of the first acts of being a dissident, of being defiant, right? You tell your kid to do something and no. And so there's this built-in kind of rebellion, dissident part of our nature until they get somewhere around high school and college age, and Progressivism is all around them. The sun, right? The center of government planning, government control. If we just make the sun, the government bigger and more powerful and have it subsidize more things and regulate more things, all these wonderful results will flow from it. And so 18-year-olds and 20-year-olds and 22-year-olds are seduced inward into those concentric circles. And then some of them, not as many as we wish, some, as they go through their life and they start paying taxes and they see government producing one miserable result after another, failing to achieve all the wonderful things it promised, some Americans start to move outward in those circles.
Hamachek explains why that happens. That light bulb goes off, and he actually says very clearly, somebody sits there and says, hey, that doesn't seem right.
It doesn't seem right.
I've believed in this for a long time, but that doesn't seem right. Maybe there's more to the story.
And that's worth emphasizing, saying a few words about, because that can be an earth-shattering, transformative thing to have a few people. It does not have to be a large number of people, maybe one or maybe a small number in key positions of influence and power, whether it's a key position at one of the big tech companies or a key position of someone in government, some high-ranking bureaucrat, maybe an elected politician, says, hold on, this doesn't seem right what we're doing, and starts talking about that and helps bring to light so that others can see, look at this thing we've been doing. Look at the way we've been controlling people and taking their property from them and hurting lives. This doesn't seem right. And that's one of our goals as dissidents, is to encourage those kinds of aha moments. And when they happen, feed into it. Give more support for those who are saying, wait a minute, the Sarah Silvermans of the world, right? She just had an aha moment. Wait, we can't even agree on anything that's true. Mm-hmm. So we cannot have a productive conversation when we can't agree on one premise that's actually true. That's an aha moment. And we who are dissidents, right, we should be encouraging her to continue to think and say, yes, let's have a conversation about some basic foundational things that we agree are true.
Right. So that's when you get that moment of okay, if they're starting to question things, what's the best way for them to engage? What's the best way for us to engage with them? And you find really the two models, right? You find the Sarah Silverman who says, you know what, I'm just done. Like, you guys are bad in this way and you guys are bad in this way, and I'm just going to go make movies. And I think for a lot of us, at least for right now, we would be really happy if a lot more people in Hollywood, if a lot more people in sports just said, you know what, I'm done with politics.
Right.
None of this is working. None of this is right. You hear the comments about Joe Biden right now from the left saying, wait, we voted for this guy. What is going on in the White House? He's not doing anything he promised us. He's just growing government, and he's doing all of these things that were against what he said on the campaign trail, and we're not getting anywhere, and we're not making any progress. And he went and bombed Syria, and we hated Trump for that. And he's keeping kids in cages in these detention centers at the border, and we have record numbers of kids coming across the border, and they're going back in the same cages that we hated Trump for.
Right.
Maybe neither side is doing anything right. You know what? Those are those people, and I'd be okay with those. Then you get the others who say, yeah, there's something wrong here, and I'm going to speak out about it. Mm-hmm. Some feel comfortable. You have the Ricky Gervaises of the world. Is that how you would say his name?
I think so.
Ricky Gervaises of the world, who will get up on a stage at, I think it was the Academy Awards last year, and just tear into everybody, saying, right, you're all a bunch of fools. And then you have the people who go to Project Veritas, not to be mistaken with the Vino Veritas Society, as I've actually had several conversations with people saying, wait, you're not Project Veritas, right? But those are the people inside of Facebook, the people inside of Google, the people inside of certain administrations, the people who work for certain congressmen saying, yeah, what I saw at the FBI, what I saw in the Department of Justice, what I see going on at Facebook or Twitter or any of these others, that's not right. And I'm going to be passive, mildly passive. I don't want to put my name on it, but this isn't right. and I need to do something about it. And I'm going to go tell somebody.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And so, so when we think about how to communicate as dissidents, we need to be, precisely because we do not have levers of power. We don't control big institutions. We need to be very careful and thoughtful, strategic, tactical, how we communicate. And part of that begins with identifying who our audience is before we communicate. When we are communicating with people in the blue zone, fellow dissidents, whether they are active or passive, we're going to communicate with fellow dissidents probably differently than we're going to communicate with people who are active supporters who are supporting oppression. And, one of the things we need to do with fellow dissidents, we need to help encourage them, fortify them, help them understand they're not alone. There's others like them. They're not crazy, right? I mean, that sounds kind of silly at first, but these are important things. We want to help move those who are fellow dissidents and they're quiet, they're passive. We want to help them find ways to become active, ways that they're comfortable with, but get them more engaged in being active dissidents so that our numbers grow, our influence grows. Then when we turn to
On that point, for anybody who wants to talk about his faults and anything else, Trump might have done a better job at that than anybody before, right? He made it clear to people, you're not going to be the only one voting for me. I did some writing back in late 2016, early 2017, just following the election, that talked about how he went out there and he loved to talk about his numbers, right?
Yeah.
And everybody thought it was this ego trip. Everybody thought it was this, well, look how many people came to my rallies and that makes me special and that's helping my ego. Had nothing to do with that.
There's a model there, isn't there?
His purpose was to actually make people say, wait, all those people are supporting Trump. Maybe I can support Trump too, and maybe I can even be public about it.
Yeah.
Maybe I can feel confident about it. And even for me, I've admitted this from day one. I like a lot of the things that Trump did while he was in office. And there were some things that disappointed me, some things that I hoped he'd follow through on that he didn't. But going into that election, I wasn't sold yet. I was not the person who said the minute he came down the gold escalator that he was there. But what he did do was he convinced me that he had a shot at winning. He convinced me there were enough people out there, because I was sitting there saying, if this is going to be a blowout, if Hillary is actually going to win with 91% of the vote,
right,
do I really want to vote for Donald Trump? Glad I did. I'm glad so many other people did. But he did that by showing me there are larger numbers. Right. And I think we need to keep that momentum up. We need to keep the momentum of saying you're not alone. There are other people who want a constitutional form of government. There are people who believe in freedom. And we're here and we want you to be a part of this.
And that's a big part of the Vino Veritas. It's why we're a society, right? We are a society. We are a community of people who have certain things in common. And then, and this is something many of our members ask about, so when we transition from talking to fellow dissidents to talking to the oppressive class.
Right.
And there are active oppressors, right? People who are actively out there working, the AOCs of the world, who's out there criticizing Joe Biden because he's not progressive enough, right? There are those types. Then there are
Sarah Silverman.
There's the Sarah Silverman of the world. She's still part of the oppressive class. She's probably still going to vote for progressive oppressors, but she's become passive, and she's trying to find her own way. When we move to talking to people like her, we're going to talk in a different way than we're going to talk to to fellow dissidents. And I want to put out here a couple of things that we've learned through our own work and our own research here. Some basic things about human nature, human psychology. One is most human beings are very reluctant, strongly reluctant to just give up core beliefs that they have. It does not happen easy or quickly. Not going to happen. You're not going to unhook people from their belief system. at least not in a short period of time. And truthfully, there might be someone in your life that you know and you think they're just completely wrong. They've been a lifetime progressive and you want to convert them to the side of freedom and light and flourishing. And you might spend decades, you might spend the rest of your life, and you might fail at changing that person. So we know that as a fact. Here's another fact that we know. The human mind has this amazing capacity to hold contradictory opinions simultaneously and be perfectly comfortable with it. I bet our listeners right now are thinking examples of people who believe things, contradictory things, and they're just fine with it. And that's a window of opening for us, because a progressive who's become passive, who is starting to question their own progressivism a little bit, we don't want to approach them and make fun of them or mock them. That's not going to. We want to be the magnets. We want to attract people. We're not going to attract people by making fun of them or calling them names. And for that matter, we can't walk up to them and just say, well, you're wrong. You're wrong on all these things. And here's why. Let me give you the data why you're all wrong. That's going to embarrass them or anger them. They're either going to dig in their heels and push back, or more likely just walk away and say, man, you're just a jerk making me feel bad. But here's what we can do is leave their existing belief system, just leave it alone. Don't touch it, ignore it, and show them something shiny and true and wonderful. Maybe it's as simple as the idea of saying, don't you agree that something you earn, that's your property, and you should own it? No, nobody, I don't have a right to something you produce and you earn. Can we agree to that? There's that shiny little, that in this case, the idea of property rights. And get someone nodding their head and agreeing with that. And any one new little idea will open a pathway to the fullness of freedom. And the question is, how quickly do you try to get there? And how much do you let that person kind of, think about, marinate, let that idea marinate in their head, and then they start to make other connections. Well, if that's my property, I should be free to do with it what I want to do with it. And then all of a sudden they're thinking in bigger realms of what liberty actually means. That's a big piece of how we communicate with the class of oppressors, is not to challenge all their belief systems, not to mock them, but show them something new and shiny that maybe they haven't thought about before.
My favorite version of that, and it comes from you. It was something you and I have been talking about for years that has been marinating in my head since then. But my favorite version of that is, can we agree that we don't want to hurt people? Like, can you at least accept that I don't want to hurt people, and I know you don't want to hurt people? I know your intentions are good. If you don't know that mine are, if you really think I want to hurt people, ask me some questions and let's talk about why I believe certain things don't hurt people as much as you think they do. But let's just at least agree that neither of us want to actually hurt people. And that kind of blows up the entire idea. Well, when they get to that agreement, it kind of blows up that idea of, well, he probably not a racist.
Right.
He's probably not
he doesn't hate women.
Right.
He doesn't hate poor people.
He's not a xenophobe. Yeah. He doesn't want to go start World War III. He doesn't want to hurt people. And when you can genuinely show that to somebody, it opens up this whole new world.
It removes an entire layer of ad hominem, right?
Right.
Takes those away. Let's set aside all the name calling. We agree we don't want to hurt people. We want to see people thrive. Now we can actually start having a constructive, productive conversations.
And then, as you move along, and this takes time, right? We have talked about this is not an overnight thing. Hamachek says repeatedly, this is not an overnight thing.
Right.
But over time, you can start to say to people, we don't want to hurt people. Have you noticed that this little policy over here, it hurt a lot of people? And then this policy over here, it also hurt a lot of people. Can we start agreeing that those are wrong?
Yep.
Let's not do those things anymore. And it's kind of shameful to support those ideas that actually are hurting people, because neither of us want to.
He ends with some suggestions. I think we're going to talk about some of them. And this points to one of them. And this is not original with him. I think he's sort of just providing a short little menu or catalog of tactics for influencing and persuading people. And an important one is asking questions. So rather than saying, this is the truth and this is what's good and you either agree or you're a bad person, that tends not to be very effective. What is very effective is asking people questions. What do you think about that policy just led to a bunch of people now unemployed and they can't make their house payment. What do you think about that? Is that a good thing? Were the rewards worth that cost? Let people share their opinion, because as they start to share their opinion, they're thinking about it. They want to give you an intelligent opinion, an informed opinion, and so they start thinking through the subject. One of the interesting features of his essay, this is a small piece, but it's kind of a pivotal turning piece, a turning moment in the essay. He's talking about dissidents, and he raises the question, who are some of the most famous dissidents? And he picks one from sort of the secular realm and one from the religious realm. Two quite famous dissidents everyone's familiar with. One is Socrates,
right,
the famous Greek philosopher, and the other is Jesus, the person who begins the Christian religion. And it is certainly true. Both were dissidents. Both challenged the status quo of their time. Both said that we think there are some things that are wrong, that are deeply mistaken. Both were punished and executed for challenging the way things were. And both proceeded in a very similar way. Both asked questions, which is kind of fascinating, right? They were surrounded by the powers that be, the go back to that inner circle, right? The government, and then all the big institutions connected to the government, these crony organizations, and they claim to be authoritative. They know the truth. And it is true, both Socrates and Jesus said, okay, I'm going to ask you some basic questions. What is right? What is true? What is just? And the answers were riddled with contradictions and big holes in them. And they just continued asking questions. That was it. And both were executed for that.
And it frustrated people.
Yeah.
It frustrated the people they were asking to the point of killing them. And in both cases, it was government. It was government that said,
absolutely,
you are frustrating us to a point that we just don't want to have to deal with you anymore.
Yep.
And it shows the ability of governments, especially oppressive governments, to use legalized force.
Well, and in both cases, those in government found those dissidents, Socrates and Jesus, not merely to be annoying, but the questions they were asking, and then everyone watching the answers and the interaction, it was undermining the legitimacy of the government. Those in government were starting to appear less knowledgeable, less wise than they. It's like that moment in The Wizard of Oz, right, where the curtain is pulled back and you see that's just a dude back there, right? Pulling away. It's not this grand wizard with some super mind. And it also points to another. This is a key strategic point Hamachek makes. It is a key strategic foundational aspect of the Vino Veritas Society, and that is these improvements we seek, these changes toward in the direction of freedom and property and free markets and constitutional government, these are not going to happen quickly.
Right.
And that was true with Socrates and Jesus. In fact, the good that resulted from their dissidency, I just made that word up. The good that came about.
Can we get Charles Merriam to add that to a dictionary?
Hey, if someone can have a presidency, someone can have a dissidency, right?
Yes.
The results that they didn't even see the results. The results came much, much longer after their death. And I'm not hoping that you and I die anytime soon, Dave, but we are hoping that the Vino Veritas Society is going to have a long-term effect. The fruits of our work, we hope, are going to be spread out over decades and generations, hundreds of years from now. The Americans who are getting together to remind each other of the core meaning of freedom, we want them to be getting together in chapters of the Vino Veritas Society.
And then we want those chapters going out and asking questions and having conversations. And you're right. I never really thought about it until just now, but it was for both Socrates and for Jesus, it was the people who came after them. It was their initial followers For Socrates, it was Plato, and then Aristotle. And it was really Aristotle. So we're talking 2 generations who started writing so many, right? You had Plato writing the Republic and some of those things. But it was Aristotle's work that really was the game changer for a lot of this stuff. And with Jesus, it was the apostles, as I understand it. And I'm certainly far from the expert on that. What's really interesting is you made the comment about they questioned things and they did it in front of the public.
Yes.
To make sure that they were aware that other people were hearing it. And that was Hamachek's first point. And if as we go through this list of tips to follow to be an effective dissident, his very first one is question everything and do it in front of others.
Yeah.
It was be public about it. Have some strength in your convictions. And that's why we keep reminding people we have the moral high ground.
Yeah.
What we are fighting for is true and right and good. You should embrace that. Don't be afraid. I've had conversations with some of our members. I'll go back to a recruitment event that we just had a few weeks ago. It was at a restaurant, and we had a waiter. Waiter was a large black man who there were new people in the room. There were people who had no experience with the Vino Veritas Society yet.
Right.
And they came up to me and they said, I'll be honest. He was walking around and serving us and taking our orders, and I was a little uncomfortable. We were talking about things that made me a little uncomfortable. And I said, why? And they said, well, because...
This is the wait staff saying this to you.
No, this is a potential member of the Vino Veritas Society. Not one of our members yet.
Right.
Somebody who came to a recruitment event was there saying, this black guy is walking around as our waiter.
Oh, I see.
And I was uncomfortable having conversations about
we were talking about
the
slavery.
Constitution. We were talking about slavery.
Yeah.
And she said, I would never have had that conversation in front of him.
Right.
And I said to her, I said, you know what's really funny? We've been doing events here now for 4 months, 5 months. He's our waiter every time. He now requests that shift. And he comes and talks to me afterward and asks me questions.
Yeah.
He's enjoying it. He is learning things.
Yeah.
He is actually saying to us, I want to know more. He doesn't take it offensively. He's actually hearing us talk about things that he's saying, these guys clearly aren't. These guys believe in freedom. They want everybody to be happy and healthy and prosperous and free.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something to that. I want to learn more.
In fact, I'm gonna brag a little bit about us for our listeners.
Okay.
There's an old line in the world of stand-up comedy that a comedian is really good when the wait staff at the facility tries to sneak over and listen to the show.
Right.
And we're doing these recruitment events, kind of a road show we've been doing, and in almost every one, we get the staff, right? So these are not people who are part of the program at all. They're people working at the restaurants and the hotels and the facilities where we hold these events. They're hanging out to listen to they're interested in what we're doing. And that's a really good sign, right? Well, we're attracting people who aren't even invited to the program to come, eavesdrop and try to listen.
And the point being, don't be embarrassed.
That's right.
Don't be nervous. Don't be fearful.
I learned this lesson of, raise questions and do it publicly so that people can watch and listen and pay attention. I learned the importance of that firsthand, now going back almost 25 years. My time out in Claremont, California, one of my duties when I started working at the Claremont Institute, my boss was a guy named Larry Arnn, who's now the president of Hillsdale College, but he was at the president of the Claremont Institute. And one of the duties he assigned to me, I was still a graduate student, and one of the senior fellow at the Claremont Institute was a guy named Harry Jaffa, who was one of my main teachers. And Jaffa was brilliant and utterly unable to get through life. Professor Jaffa was this type where he could give a brilliant lecture and then get lost trying to get out of the hotel or wherever you were. So my job was just to be his escort. I would travel with him when he would go and speak. And he, he was a very serious, accomplished scholar, and he was invited to speak at all kinds of different events. And one time we were driving in the car, and he loved debates. That was his favorite. He would give a talk on his own if he had to, but what he preferred was to actually be on a stage with one or two or three other people and mix it up a little bit. And I said to him, the guy he was debating that time, I said, you didn't persuade him. He's going to keep going and making the same arguments. And he looked at me, he said, Tom, that's not the purpose. I don't care if I changed his mind or not. There were 500 people in the audience. My interest is the audience.
Right.
They heard that exchange. And I promise you, I dropped a lot of ideas into a lot of heads today. People started thinking through that exchange. And, there I was, a young guy still in graduate school trying to figure these things out. And I realized the power there of those exchanges and debates. Think of it was one of the most famous series of debates in all of human history, Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas. Douglas did not change Lincoln's mind. Lincoln didn't change Douglas's mind. But that wasn't the goal of either of them. The goal was those in the audience listening. That's who they were trying to reach.
And it worked.
And it worked.
That's
right.
Yes, Douglas won that Senate race. 2 years later, Abraham Lincoln wins
the presidency. And so when our members are asking questions and they're doing it in public, it's okay if you don't persuade the person you're questioning. Always remember the fact of doing it in public is people are watching and listening. And how can you raise an idea, present an idea in a way that others find attractive?
I'm going to go back to something we talked about all the way back in one of our first couple of podcasts. But I was having a conversation with a friend or a friend of a friend, somebody he was dating, and we were talking about progressivism versus American idea. And she actually told me, she actually said out loud, not just to me, but in front of other people,
right.
I can empathize with the 9/11 hijackers. I can empathize with those terrorists.
Yeah.
While I might not agree with what they did, I can understand that they believed what they did was right, and I'm not I don't have a right to tell them it was wrong. Right?
Right.
It's the very foundation of the moral relativism foundation. It's why Sarah Silverman said, I'm not going to be a Democrat anymore.
And there were people listening to her say this.
I am never going to change her mind.
Right.
But there were people around who the minute they heard that, they will never be a progressive.
Yeah.
They might still be looking for their place and their role and what they think. But the fact that somebody who was so strong in her progressive convictions heard that, they will never, ever, ever go that way.
Yeah.
So that's a good point. I don't want to go through all of these. We don't want to go too much longer, but I think there's a few others that I think are worth mentioning here.
Sure.
And one of them is know that there's going to be martyrs as dissenters. There's going to be martyrs, and we need to keep track of them. We need to remember them.
And I think he means martyrs in a big sense. I mean, there might be actual martyrs, people who are killed by the regime, right?
Sure.
Executed, but also metaphorical martyrs, people who lose their jobs, lose their business, lose their exalted position, as a celebrity or something, because they stand up for truth, because they stand up for liberty, and the progressive mobs come and whack at them.
And for those people, in that it's kind of the better martyr because nobody's dying.
Right.
We're avoiding the actual murder of people from a regime. When he says remember them, I think there's two things that come from that. I think the first thing is go support them. Right? They're still trying to be in business. They're still trying to make a living. You and I have people in our circle, in our close-knit circle who are already those martyrs. They're the ones being harassed by county health departments during this COVID situation. Go support them. Have dinner there, buy things from them, support them in whatever way you can.
You've just laid out a really good reason for business owners who are liberty lovers, Constitution lovers, why they should be sponsoring Vino Veritas Society events.
Yeah, and letting us tell those stories.
That's right.
There was an example. One of our members gave me, this is probably a month and a half ago. She owns an online virtual clothing boutique. She sells clothes online.
Yeah.
And in that process, she follows.
Does she have a short and chubby section for me?
It's women only.
Okay, all right.
It's called Garbed in Glitter and Grace.
Okay.
I'm not sure that's your style. I don't think she carries black.
Okay. No Johnny Cash section.
No Johnny Cash section. But she follows a lot of these other bloggers who are out there in the market who are promoting different other online boutiques and other fashion things. And one of them came out and said she supports freedom and supported Trump in the 2020 election. And the hate just started pouring in.
Yeah, I bet.
She lost thousands and thousands of followers on social media. People unsubscribed from her newsletter. But those who didn't started to promote her, started to say, hey, we need to go support this woman. And supposedly she lost about 20,000 email subscribers.
Yep.
A week later, she had gained 140,000 new ones.
That's great.
So that's what people need to keep in mind when they talk about the fear is you're going to be a martyr. You're going to be hated. People are going to dislike you. People are going to say you're cruel, you're this, you're that. That doesn't mean that they're right.
Yep.
And there will be other people, and we need to remember to go support them because there will be other people who go and support them.
Right.
The other piece of it is those are the stories we need to tell, right? We need to use those to make it personal. We need to use those when we have conversations. It's very easy to talk about Facebook, who's this nameless, faceless organization, or even worse, some of the bureaucracies out there that we don't even know who they are. We have no idea who's behind the scenes doing anything. Let's personalize them as often as possible.
And that cuts both ways. When we're talking about the harm done by progressive central planning, we should make it personal. These people who work in this agency implemented this regulation, and it actually hurt these people. And then when progressives are sitting around denouncing wide swath, they're generalizing and saying, conservatives are racists and people who believe in liberty must despise the poor, right, and hate the Mother Earth and all these things. Personalize that too. Look at those progressives and say, that's me.
Yeah.
So I believe in liberty. Do you think I am a racist? Do you think I hate poor people or hate children or hate the earth? Because I actually believe in liberty. Make it personal.
And it goes back to, we said this 20 minutes ago. Do you think I want to hurt people?
Right.
I don't want to hurt people. I don't think you want to hurt people.
Right.
What makes you think I want to hurt people?
In fact, why are you sitting here at dinner with me? If you actually think I want to go do all these terrible, nefarious, unjust things to people, why are you here at dinner with me?
Right. So that was one. And then there was one other point that I thought was really worth bringing up. And that was, remember, we're trying to fight for the restoration of the United States, not necessarily the restoration of the Trump presidency or the Reagan presidency.
Yep.
I think both of them, to a certain extent, I'm certain to a great extent, both of them were fighting for the restoration of the United States.
Yeah.
Trump wasn't fighting to become king. As much as the left wanted to say it,
yeah.
Trump had no interest in becoming our king. He had no interest in changing the term limit laws so he could become president for life and all of these types of things. He wanted a restoration of this country.
Well, and this sort of comes back to the whole mission of the Vino Veritas Society, which is devoted to guarding the American idea, those self-evident truths enshrined in the Declaration that provide the foundation for this regime. We're not trying to support any kind of cult of personality. We want to support a regime of ideas, of self-evident truths, a regime of liberty. And the best presidents, there's this old industry of trying to rank presidents, who is the best president, who's the worst, and rank them all. I'll say this about presidents and all other politicians. The best ones don't make it about themselves. They are out there promoting the ideas of the American founding. The best ones, that's what they do. And those who are willing to promote those ideas, hold those ideas up, act in accordance with them, govern in accordance with them, those are the people we should support, not personally, not because of personal loyalty, but because we all agree on those ideas. And that's key when we're thinking in this hyper, partisan political environment we're in. What we're looking for is not a cult of personality for a particular political figure, but those who will help restore the self-evident truths of the American founding.
Imagine, let's go back to the Socrates, Plato, Aristotle example. Imagine if all those books that Aristotle wrote, instead of writing on physics and writing on philosophy and religion and science, Socrates or Aristotle simply wrote, look how great Socrates was. Can we just please agree that Socrates was a great man?
Well,
can we just focus entirely on the life of Socrates and this great life that he lived, and let's all become Socrates again?
I'll give you there's a perfect example of the opposite. Nietzsche, he wrote a book called Ecce Homo, and the very first chapter is titled "Why I Write Such Great Books." It's all about me, not this set of ideas out there that we can all participate in.
Right. Well, I know we're coming up on time, but I wanted to add one more thing to this idea of the restoration of the United States, and this goes back to a conversation I overheard at a chapter meeting for chapter number 1 here in Denver. They've started talking about, when they talk about the precepts and the right to revolution, this idea that it's a restoration. The hardest part about everything that we're talking about, and you and I have talked about this, I think we've talked about this on podcasts, I know we've talked about it in chapter meetings, I know we've talked about it in other circumstances. There has never in the history of the world been a revolution where the government was overthrown, but the structure of that government was maintained.
Right.
And if we're going to, if we actually want to believe that we want to maintain the ideas of the Declaration, the way they're enshrined through our Constitution, a revolution is not the ideal next step.
Right.
Because to have a revolution is going to be very, very hard to keep that.
Or it has to be a kind of redefined kind of revolution, because, right, when you think about revolution in the most radical sense, let's literally blow up, destroy, dismantle, abolish the current government. In a way, that's easy. Not easy to pull off, but it's easy to understand the goal.
Right.
The current government, get rid of it. Even if we're not clear what we're going to do instead, just get rid of it. That's not our position. As liberty lovers, we don't want to get rid of everything. We want to preserve the precepts. We want to preserve those self-evident truths of the Declaration of Independence. We want to preserve the constitutional structure of our government. We think the Constitution was pretty wisely designed. We haven't seen a better one.
Right.
It's pretty good. So there's a lot we want to conserve and preserve. There's this entire progressive administrative state, this gigantic subsidy regulatory state that should go. And how do you dismantle and abolish and get rid of everything that's unconstitutional and unjust and unwise and preserve the good? That's the challenge that we're in. I think that's what you're talking about.
And I am. And I think I want to go back to where we started this conversation today, these concentric circles. If you believe in a restoration versus just a total overthrow and to start over, our best hope is, and I mean that word intentionally, hope, right? If we want to have any hope, it's about slowly moving people from one rung of these circles to a little further out and a little further out and a little further out. Yeah. And one way to do that is to expand the outer ring to encompass its next ring in. And then once you're there, then you go after the next ring in, and then you go after the next ring in, until all of a sudden this government, all levels of government are just surrounded by these dissidents saying, you can't do this to us anymore.
We become the majority and we start winning elections.
Right. And that's the way this is going to change. And so for all of those people who say this is over, we just need to fight a civil war and Vino Veritas society isn't worth its time, I hope you think about it. I hope you think about, can we bring those passive opponents of oppression to become more active?
Yep.
And then can they help us bring those passive supporters of oppression to maybe become passive opponents of oppression and slowly start converting more and more and more people?
Because the truth is, at the center of everything we're doing is hope. If we were not a hopeful group, you and I'd be doing something else. We have hope. We think that it's worth guarding the American idea because we're hopeful that we can have a future in which those ideas are influential.
There is hope inherent to the American idea.
That's right. That's why we're the guardians.
No somos custodes.
Till next time.